After missing nearly 4 months, Josh Jung is finally back. But is that the only big trade deadline acquisition the Rangers are going to make? We'll talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Before we get into Josh Jung being back, Jon Gray's injury, and the lineup shift that might have just changed this Rangers offense's dynamic, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Now, here we are. I am recording this at exactly 9 a.m. Central Time, the day of the trade deadline. The Texas Rangers are 8 hours away from the trade deadline. They are 3.5 games back of the Mariners and Astros, both in a virtual tie atop the AL West after last night losing both of them in different excruciating fashions. But the Rangers snapped their losing streak that they had over the weekend. Just a brutal weekend in Toronto with a 6-3 win. A nice start from Eovaldi, a nice offensive performance from this team, and a solid lockdown 3 innings from the bullpen, as this team has become accustomed to. And here they are, 3.5 games back in the AL West at the deadline. This is where this team was hoping to be. This is where they thought they could be heading into this year, with a team that was supposed to be carried by the bats, hasn't been so far this year, was supposed to be just brutal in terms of a starting rotation, has not been. You might remember that quote in a Ken Rosenthal article early on in the year about them talking about maybe making a trade early on in the season to just get some kind of starting rotation. The exec speaking not on the condition of anonymity, saying, "Have you seen our first half rotation?" Well, he didn't know that this first half rotation was going to be fantastic. I mean, Nathan Eovaldi, Andrew Heaney, Max Scherzer, heck, what they got out of Jon Gray and Michael Lorenzen so far. Dane Dunning as well, being mostly pretty darn solid. And Cody Bradford's 3 starts, not to mention those. The Rangers just need some help in the offense, or have needed some help in the offense last night, switching things up in a big way. Marcus Semien had not hit anywhere other than leadoff since his first year with the Rangers. That year he spent 2 games hitting third, 40 games hitting second, and every other game that he has played in a Texas Rangers uniform before last night, the man was batting leadoff. And last night, Bruce Bochy said, how about I change things up? What if I put Josh Smith in the leadoff? What if I put Corey Seager where he's always been? And Marcus Semien, who has been the hottest Rangers batter over the last couple weeks, maybe the last even month or so, but definitely the last couple weeks, put him as Corey Seager's protection in the 3-hole, and it worked out. Rangers were able to get 6 runs last night. They probably should have gotten a little bit more. I mean, 9 runners left on base, 13 hits for the Rangers last night. Could have done a little bit more damage, but hey, they did enough to get the win, which is the most important thing at the end of the day, especially when you are this close to the trade deadline, and every win meant everything. And if they headed into the deadline on a 4-game losing streak, even after that 5-game winning streak they had literally right before that weekend series in Toronto, it might have changed things. Maybe it's dramatic to say that one win over the Cardinals the day before the trade deadline changed their plans of being buyers versus sellers. But I don't know that it's really all that outlandish to say, especially with Houston's elite bullpen blowing yet another game. Thank you to Michael A. Taylor for the massive 3-run shot. Ended up being game-winning homer off of Josh Hader. And the Boston Red Sox absolutely obliterating the Seattle Mariners last night. Randy Arozarena getting his first home run as a Mariner to cut the deficit to just 10 runs. Just chef kiss. If you follow basketball, it's like that Chris Paul meme from Game 7 against the Rangers when Chris Paul hits a massive 3 to trim the deficit to 40 points or something like that. But this Rangers lineup is looking much better, much healthier because of the addition of Josh Jung. Finally, my boy, Josh Jung is back after some rehab games in Frisco. He is back on the roster, not in the lineup last night because of a planned day off. There was a flurry of moves. It's an absolute flurry of moves. Before Monday's game, the Rangers activated Josh Jung. They also activated Cody Bradford from the IL. They recalled Ezequiel Duran and Gerson Garabito. But to make those moves, there were some roster casualties. Jon Gray placed on the 15-day IL with another right groin strain. That is the injury that kept him out for 16 days earlier this season. Bochy said that it's going to be at least 2 weeks, if not a month, for Gray. We'll talk more about what that means for the rotation, the options they have to replace him if they're going to go trade for a starting pitcher. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. But they also had to make some 40-man moves as well as moves on the big league roster. They sent Andrew Kisner down to AAA because he had an option. Jonathan Ornelas and Justin Foscue also optioned to AAA Round Rock. Austin Pruitt, who had been on the IL since, I believe, April or May. He had been on the 60-day IL, so not taking up a 40-man spot, I don't believe, since he was on that 60-day IL, but he was released. I didn't think he was going to pitch anymore for the Rangers anyway, but that was not the most consequential roster casualty. The most consequential was Davis Wenzel, who was designated for assignment to make room on that 40-man roster. Wenzel, a supplemental first-round pick back in 2019, the co-Big 12 Player of the Year with Josh Jung. Kind of poetic in a sad way that he was cut the day that Josh Jung, his co-Big 12 Player of the Year, back in 2019, was activated on the roster. But Zeke Duran being back is a big thing for this Rangers squad. He was the AAA Player of the Week last week because he homered in 4 straight games leading up to last night's game. He also had a 4-hit day. He had 5 home runs, 1 triple, 1 double in the last 6 games with the Round Rock Express. He had a 4-hit game in his final AAA game saying, "I'm here, I'm back, I'm ready. I am absolutely ready." And in the 19 games for Round Rock since he was optioned, he had an 856 OPS, a slugging percentage of .554, 5 homers, 2 triples, 4 doubles in 19 games. That is the kind of production they were looking for Zeke Duran. They optioned him to get him some more confidence, get to work on his swing because, again, this lineup needs every hot bat that it can get. Now, is Zeke Duran going to play every single day? I'm not sure, especially with Josh Jung being activated. Monday was the planned day off, so he is going to be back in this lineup on Tuesday. And then we'll see where that lands Josh Smith. And we'll see where that lands Wyatt Langford. And we'll see where that lands Leody Taveras. I think those are the biggest, names up in the air of where exactly they'll play. Langford is obviously still going to be playing. I think Smith has to play every single day. Now, whether that's as an everyday DH or whether that's in left field and moving Langford to center field, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think that Adolis Garcia is going to get benched. I feel like his at-bats the last couple of weeks have been significantly better, and I think giving him every chance to homer against his former team in the Cardinals is a good thing for this lineup, but shifting it up and moving Smith to the leadoff spot, I think is a good thing for him. I think that getting some right-handed bats behind Seager as the protection is a good move. Getting Semien into a spot where he is able to drive in more runs with Seager and Smith being on base all the time is good, because he has been so good in those clutch situations with runners in scoring position. But with Heim and Taveras on extended cold streaks, which both of them ended up getting in on the action last night, Taveras with his 12th double of the season and an RBI, and Jonah Heim with a multi-hit game. I don't think it's coincidence Jonah getting a multi-hit game right after the Rangers made a trade for a catcher. But this lineup is getting that push. This lineup is getting those reinforcements. And even though the Rangers rotation did take the setback with trading away Michael Lorenzen and Jon Gray landing on the IL, I think they're going to be okay in the short term. But let's look a little bit at what's left at the trade deadline, what the AL West has done, and why standing pat, I think, might be the most logical move for the Rangers. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Now, so far, the Rangers haven't done nothing at the trade deadline. They did trade away Michael Lorenzen as what they thought was a little bit of, depth from a starting pitching standpoint, which, again, I think I talked about on yesterday's show, just saying you never, ever, 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 ever can have enough starting pitching, especially when almost all of that starting pitching is over 30 years old. You can never have enough depth. As the Rangers saw last year when they had approximately 837 different pitchers hurt at some point last year. Maybe my math is a little bit off, but spiritually, that felt correct. But the Rangers did make a trade for Carson Kelly as Jonah Heim's backup, which I don't think he's going to supplant Jonah Heim as the everyday starter. Trading for a catcher at the deadline is a difficult thing to do because catchers have to know so much about their staff, about how different pitchers like to throw, what kind of, pitch sequences they like, just getting comfortable with that. And so usually you don't see a whole lot of catchers moved at the deadline, but the Rangers did make this move for Carson Kelly. They made a move for Austin Hedges last year. That was more as a result of Jonah Heim's injury and them not being sure when exactly Heim would be ready. They also had a pretty nice backup last year in Mitch Garver. The Rangers' backup this year offensively is no Mitch Garver. Not even the bad version of 2024 Mitch Garver. I mean, it has been absolutely brutal for Andrew Knizner. I don't need to go much more into that with him being optioned. He did have one option year left, so that kind of absolutely makes sense. But Carson Kelly, I talked to our Tigers host, Locked On Tigers host, Scott Bentley, asked him if there's anything I should know about Carson Kelly, and he said, well, he's an awesome man. He's a great pickup. He was literally cut by Arizona this time last year and was just brutal. But then this year he's been legit one of the best hitting catchers in baseball since the start of May. Great defensive metrics as well, and definitely turned his career around. He hits righties well, which I talked about on yesterday's show. But if that's the only acquisition, you may be thinking, okay, are these Rangers serious about contending this year? Is that it? Is this all they're going to do? Because you look at the AL West, and the AL West has been making some big, big moves. Specifically with Seattle, making the trade for Randy Arozarena, who's got a couple more years of control after this. I really like that trade for them. I don't like that for the Rangers being in the division with them. I thought the Seattle's offense, everyone knew Seattle's offense was at least 2, maybe 3 bats away from being competent, especially with Julio Rodriguez having not only a down year, but being on the IL. J.P. Crawford having a down year, also being on the IL. Randy gives them a legit star out there to pair with Julio Rodriguez. They also made a trade for Justin Turner. Solid pickup for them. They also made a trade for reliever Yemi Garcia, or Jimmy Garcia, I believe is how that's pronounced, and I've been pronouncing it wrong for years. And the Astros hadn't done anything. They had been linked to Isaac Paredes, who ended up being traded to Chicago, the Cubs, that is, not the White Sox. They were not making a trade for any kind of good baseball player. Even when they traded away their good baseball players, they made some head-scratching moves to the point where I might think that the Rangers should go try and fleece them for Luis Robert. But alas, Houston did make a trade yesterday for Yusei Kikuchi, the left-handed pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays, with a 4.5 ERA, and they gave up an absolute haul. Just an absolute haul. You may remember Jeremy Click, their former GM, that won them the World Series and then was basically allowed to not renew his contract. Right, James Click, excuse me, not Jeremy Click. I'm confusing him with Jeremy Pena for some reason. No, James Click, the former GM that won them the World Series and helped build an incredibly sustainable, good team. And just the last few years, we've seen Houston make these head-scratching moves that, prior to the last couple of years, Houston was thought of as one of the smartest organizations in baseball. And then they go and get Yusei Kikuchi, a guy who is a good pitcher, I think better than his stats. The Rangers just saw him this past weekend and did quite a bit of damage on him. He's got a decent strikeout rate. He's been a little bit unlucky with the defense. The batted balls in play data and his expected numbers say he should probably be a little bit better than a 4.5 ERA pitcher, which a 4.5 ERA pitcher this year, when all pitchers have been so good and offense has been so down, is just wild. But the fact that the Astros gave up, according to Baseball America, 2 top 5 prospects and a third one that was also in their top 20. Now, the Astros farm system is bad. It's probably bottom 10 in baseball, maybe bottom 5. So them giving up 3 top 20 guys would not be the same as, say, the Rangers or the Mariners or, I don't know, the Orioles giving up 3 top 20 guys. But still, to make that kind of a spend on a rental, and it's not just the Astros. This might be the most egregious overpay of the trade deadline, but it's not out of line in terms of what contenders are giving up for these rentals. I mean, the trade that the Phillies gave to the return that the Phillies gave to the Angels for Carlos Estevez, who is a reliever who is probably not even going to be Philadelphia's closer in the postseason, but they gave up 2 massive rising guys that could look fantastic in Anaheim's system for a reliever. He's probably going to be a 7th inning guy and is a rental. Seeing the return that the Padres gave up, Dylan Lesko, who is not having the best year, but a guy who was a first-round pick, would have been a top 5 pick pretty easily had his elbow not had some issues in his draft season. As a high school pitcher, I mean, he had that kind of shine on him. Giving him up for a reliever, albeit probably a top 15 reliever, with a couple years of control after this, along with 2 other prospects, made some Rangers fans think, okay, this team has to be sellers. You can't possibly justify not being sellers. But I think that if you're this close, I know that if you're this close and you are supposed to be contending this year, you are in one of the years of peak Semien and Seager and peak deGrom and peak Nate Eovaldi, and you also have Max Scherzer on your team. Oh, and also you found a top 5 reliever in baseball on the cheap for nothing in Kirby Yates. You also have you have enough solid pieces in your bullpen to go on a deep run. The offense, which is underachieved, has more in there to compete with any of these postseason teams. You can't punt. You're 3.5 out in the West. You cannot punt on this season. But it would be also very difficult to justify going for it at this deadline. Standing pat feels like the right move right now. Because even though the Rangers could probably get an absolutely massive, outrageous haul if they traded away Kirby Yates. I mean, something absolutely absurd. If they traded away Nate Eovaldi right now, I think they would get a massive, massive haul. Especially if that team thought that Eovaldi was going to hit 156 innings pitched this year in the regular season, meaning that he would have a $20 million vesting option for next year. So you don't just get postseason big game Nate for 1 year. You get him for 2. That would be a massive, massive haul. Same with if Max Scherzer would be willing to waive his no trade clause, which I don't think he would be. Same with David Robertson. Heck, same with Jose Leclerc, who is a free agent at the end of this year. But how can you justify to those guys in the room and to Bruce Bochy, who came out of retirement to compete every single year? How can you look those guys in the eye and say, no, we're trying to contend for sure, but trade away guys that could help you win next year? I know the team hasn't performed like they wanted to, like they expected to, like I know we all thought they would, or at least I did. But when you're this close, and you can't buy and you can't sell, maybe standing pat is actually the right move. Coming up, we're going to look at some of the trade deadline acquisitions that the Rangers will claim to be making in terms of guys coming off the IL, and a couple of guys who they actually could trade for if they do want to make that big swing at the deadline. Right after this word from our sponsors. The show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, it is just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends. Become part of the PrizePicks community today. Let's look at today's board with some of the Major League Baseball players. Let's see. We've got, Bobby Witt Jr., hitter fantasy score, more or less than 10. Well, he's been hitting over 500 since the All-Star break, and last night he had a go-ahead grand slam to beat the White Sox and extend their losing streak to 15 games. I might just go more than the 10 hitter fantasy score for him. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., runs, hits, plus RBIs at 1.5. I'm hitting more on that. He has been just red hot. And then let's see, Tyler Glasnow, more or less than 6 pitcher strikeouts. I'm smashing the more on that. It's that simple, and you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. So download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now, the Rangers rotation is going to look a little different over the next couple of weeks. Thankfully, the Rangers will have some off days, actually 4 off days in the month of August, which is huge for this team, especially with the injury to Jon Gray. Now, it seemed like dealing Lorenzen away was a little bit premature, but given the fact that he had a, 7 ERA in his last 5-7 starts, was not pitching deep into games. Now, that heroic Sunday start, or I should say 4-inning relief outing after a horrible Saturday start, that was huge for Lorenzen. And I don't want to badmouth him in any way, because the gift that he gave the Rangers of all those innings in those big spots, it was huge. It was actually very huge. And the fact that the Rangers are even in a spot where they can think about being contenders is in no small part to what Michael Lorenzen did. But he was clearly odd man out in this rotation. With a fully healthy rotation, he was probably the 7th or 8th option to start. I mean, I was even thinking about maybe moving Urena into the rotation and Lorenzen into the bullpen, just because Lorenzen just had not been good. But with Jon Gray out, the Rangers now have a rotation of Eovaldi, Scherzer, Heaney, and question mark. But the question marks can be filled by decent guys who have started this year, who have succeeded as starters this year, and who are already on the roster. I think Jose Urena has got to be the first one to jump into that rotation. So now you have a 4-man rotation. You have 2 off days in the next week and a half. They have an off day on Thursday, and they have an off day next Thursday. So, if Jon Gray happens to be out for just 2 weeks, which is the minimum of 15 days, he'll be back on the 14th? No, 13th. That middle of that series in Boston, which would be ideal. I mean, ideally, Jon Gray is back then, because right now, Tyler Mahle is hopefully coming back at some point next week. Looking like that series against Houston, he will have his next rehab outing tomorrow on Wednesday. He will be probably targeting around 70, 65 pitches in that next outing for Round Rock. He threw 4 innings and 55 pitches in his last rehab outing for Frisco. So I was thinking 65 to 70 pitches. It was, if he was starting on normal rest, it would have been today, July 30th, he was making that next rehab start, but they've been giving him just a little bit of an extra day's rest on this turn through the rotation. So that would be Wednesday. So if he comes back on normal rest, that would be probably 85 to 90 pitches in his next start out, which should about be, maybe it's 80 to 85 pitches. But even still, that's still good enough for him to be in this major league rotation. That would be next week. So then you would have a 5-man rotation with Urena as the number 5. And, well, maybe Urena's the 4. It doesn't really matter the order, but you would have Tyler Mahle in there and Jose Urena. I think at least one trip through the rotation, you might get a Dane Dunning start. And if Dane Dunning is your second emergency, starter, that is a darn good place to be. You would also have, if those guys enter the rotation, depending on when Mahle is scheduled to come back, it depends on how long those guys would stick in that rotation. But if that's the case, you think, okay, well, who are the Rangers' long relief options? Well, they just got Cody Bradford back. They've also got Gerson Garavito, who, not ideal, but for when healthy, probably a 4th or 5th string long reliever. If that's your 2nd string long reliever at this point, while you're having to slot those other 2 long relief guys into the rotation, that's fine. That's fine. I think this is how I would set up the rotation over the next couple of weeks. This series against Houston or against Boston, I think that it would look a little bit something like this. Urena / bullpen day on Friday, then Eovaldi, Scherzer. Then against Houston, you'd have Heaney on Monday. And then on the extra 1-day rest would be Tyler Mahle making his season debut against Houston. Or if you wanted to give him the, full week to recover, then that would be the 7th. I don't think that it would be any more than that if he's coming up that week. If he's not going to have another rehab start, then it's going to be either the 6th or the 7th, pretty darn sure. I don't think they're going to wait until, that weekend series against the Yankees. Maybe it'll end up being that road trip. But still, then you look at that series against the Yankees, and it would look a little bit something like this. Eovaldi, Scherzer, and then Heaney as well. Urena would start that 3rd game against Houston, or he would start the 2nd game against Houston. Actually, probably just that 3rd game, because that would be the normal day's rest. Maybe that would end up being Dunning. Not entirely sure, but there are some options there, and I wouldn't worry too much about giving up Michael Lorenzen for a guy who I think is interesting as a left-handed relief option. We'll see what the Rangers can end up doing with him, their return from that Michael Lorenzen trade. But let's look a little bit at who is actually left if the Rangers want to make a big swing. Looking at the Athletics' top 50 players at the trade deadline that are theoretically on the market. Now, they had a lot of guys that were on teams that aren't going to end up selling, or teams that, might end up selling. Still not quite sure. I mean, they had Scherzer. They had, I'm surprised they didn't have Kirby Yates on there as one of the top 50 trade assets. If they're going to have Scherzer and they're going to have Eovaldi there, I don't see why they wouldn't put either David Robertson or Kirby Yates, because he is way better than almost every other one of the relief options on this market. But alas, they have a few bats that are still available. Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Luis Robert, Pete Alonso, Yandy Diaz, Christian Walker, Cody Bellinger, Brent Rooker, Rockies 3rd baseman Ryan McMahon, Luis Rengifo, JD Martinez, Jock Peterson, Harrison Bader, Michael Conforto, Jorge Soler. Oh, wait, nope. Jorge Soler is officially on the move to Atlanta, Elias Diaz, and Taylor Ward. Now, I ran through those really quickly because most of them aren't getting traded. Most of them are on teams that were on the bubble when that article came out, but are absolutely going to be going for it, including the Diamondbacks. They're going to be going for it. The Rangers are going to be going for it. The Mets, I'm pretty darn sure, are going to be going for it because they are holding a wild card spot right now, and they have that massive payroll. You can't really just punt on that season if you're the Mets, even more so than if you are the Rangers right now. But the guys who I think are probably getting moved, Yandy Diaz has been bantered about. There have been some reports, according to Francis Romero, who is a BBWA member, a baseball reporter, really has strong ties to the Cuban baseball community. According to sources, this was on the 29th. 3 teams are still in talks with the Rays and are the main candidates to acquire Yandy Diaz: the Pirates, Yankees, and Astros. Not seeing the Rangers tied in there. I thought that they might kick the tires on Yandy Diaz, but Nathaniel Lowe, over his last 30 games, has looked like exactly what you hoped Nathaniel Lowe would look like. Hitting .290, on base .382, elite, and slugging .505, 7 home runs in those last 30 games, including 3 home runs in his last 15. And if you look at his last 7 games, the dude has been on fire. .348, 500 OBP, .652 slugging, couple of homers, 7 walks to 6 strikeouts. That's the Nathaniel Lowe the Rangers absolutely need. Getting Josh Jung back in the mix in this lineup is going to make this lineup even more dangerous. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that Evan Carter was moved to the 60-day IL in terms of all of those flurry of movements. He was already been on the IL for 60 days. There's not been any update on Evan Carter. So if he is cleared and healthy tomorrow after seeing some kind of back specialist, he's already seen one, but if they decide tomorrow that, Evan Carter's fine, he could be activated tomorrow. It was just kind of to clear up a 40-man roster spot. So the guys who are possibly on the move, I mean, if the Rangers want to kick the tires on Luis Robert Jr., I think it cost a crap ton. Maybe that's what the Rangers end up doing, or maybe they see Wyatt as their everyday center fielder. I think that might be more likely. Yandy Diaz is a guy who I would like the Rangers to maybe kick the tires on. Taylor Ward is also there. Or maybe Brent Rooker. I'm not entirely sure. Rooker's going to take a whole lot to get away from the A's. They have not made the smartest trades over the last couple of years. See the returns for, Sean Murphy and Matt Olson as the main ones that are like, okay, that's not a kind of trade that I would thought the A's would have been, swindled into. But there's not a whole lot there for the Rangers to make that big old swing. If they want to make a swing, I think Diaz or Rooker would make sense. Or if they're big believers in Nathaniel Lowe, which I think they should be. I think I am. He's going to be the everyday first baseman, I'm pretty darn sure, for the next couple of seasons after this. Maybe it's 3 seasons of control after this. Not entirely sure. I know it's at least 2 more. But this offense has the pieces. I can't wait to see what it looks like with Josh Jung's first game back. Hopefully he can be just as hot as he was earlier on this season. The trade deadline is, 7.5 hours away now. Maybe the Rangers will make a flurry of moves before then. Maybe they won't. But I think as long as they aren't big sellers, they can sit here and they can wait. Watch the other AOS teams take some big swings and then pass them anyway. I think that might just be the funniest possible outcome for the second half of this season. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.